Mr. Kinzinger, thank you for your service also on our sub and to our nation.
It's good to be back. Thanks. And thank you all for being here. Obviously, I think it comes as no surprise. I thought the JCPOA was a pretty bad deal. And I think it really just provides, as we look at it, a roadmap for a timeline and how to acquire nuclear weapons eventually. And when it comes to playing the long game, I think Iran is okay with saying we can have weapons in 10 or 15 years, or the threat of weapons is almost in many cases as good as having them. But I also think now, obviously, we're in a situation where to redevelop, despite the discussion of snapback provisions and sanctions, which we knew would never happen, being able to develop a coalition of people to re-engage Iran through that, it'd be difficult. But I think we have to watch this JCPOA like a hawk and be ready to fight back against any violations and push back against ballistic missile technology. I also think, when you look at Iran, and it's not just what is happening in Yemen, I think what is extremely important is what is happening in Syria. And you look at the Bashar al-Assad, who I actually believe created ISIS, not necessarily by signing on the dotted line somewhere, but by creating an environment where it's easy to recruit and to dash ISIS from. And so I believe that Iran bears some responsibility for the existence of ISIS. Now, I also want to say I'm co-chair of the Iraq Caucus, and obviously an Iraq veteran myself. And when I was in Iraq, we saw the role of Iran in Iraq very, very closely. We know that hundreds of Americans died as a result of Iran's involvement in Iraq, and we know that in fact the incoming Iranian ambassador is a senior IRGC official. So we can only estimate what that means. We cannot allow Iran to continue to destabilize Iraq. So in addition to sanctions, Mr. Eisenstadt, how would you advise the administration to counter Tehran's influence in Iraq?
Thank you. First thing I would recommend is that we commit to make it clear to the Iraqis, and let me just say, the Iraqi government, both the current government and even the previous government under Nouri al-Maliki, have always wanted to maintain a balance between the United States and Iran, and indicating to them that we want to maintain a long-term security relationship with them, as well as a relationship in other areas. We'll make it clear to them that they will have the ability to continue with that policy. We have to recognize, because of proximity, they have to make their peace with the Iranians and live with a certain degree of influence that many Iraqis feel uncomfortable. But making it clear that we want a long-term security relationship with them is the first part of that. I think committing to a long-term training relationship with the Iraqi armed forces. I mean, one of the things that's come through with this campaign in Mosul is that it was basically, while in the early days after June 2014, the Popular Mobilization Forces were very important for breaking the advance of ISIL, the conventional military forces have been key to pushing them back in most places. No. And I think we can make a very convincing case to the Iraqi government that you need to continue building up your conventional security forces, and we're really the ideal partner to do that. Right. Iran can't help you there. So there's things we can do, I think, in this regard to continue to ensure that Iraq knows that we want this relationship, and they'll be able to push back.
And that's important to note too, is the Iraqi military can be fully capable, but they need the American military to stiffen their spine, at least for now. And we see obviously that was important in the fight against Daesh. Ms. Rosenberg, I want to ask you about Syria. Again, 500,000 dead Syrians, almost 50,000 of which are children. You're watching Iran use, I think, money from sanction relief to prop up that regime. And unfortunately, around the world, there's kind of this belief now that it's either Bashar al-Assad or it's terrorism. And I don't think people recognize that, in fact, Assad's creating the next generation of terrorists right now that we'll end up having to fight by taking away opportunity and freedom for people. But specifically, when I talk about the sanctions relief and the money, do you know if there's any way that we can track how much that money is being used in Iran? And if they're using that to fund genocides, what kind of action can we take to punish them?
Thank you for the question. It's difficult, as I think you're indicating, to track exactly where Iran's money that was unfrozen after the nuclear deal is going or is flowing specifically. That's true for a number of reasons. Two key ones are that if we're talking about state revenues, that it goes into a state budget and can be allocated as under the design of the state. So there's not a transaction chain to follow if it were going through independent institutions that have their that must use private banking channels, et cetera. Another significant reason that it's difficult to understand exactly where it's flowing is because Iran has ample reason to keep that money outside of its own jurisdiction and not to repatriate it and then to hand it over, in this instance, to President Assad in terms of cash or material support, using this to defend its currency, using it to balance international trade. Iran still struggles for access to hard currency, so there's quite ample reason for it to use this for what is essentially the civilian economy. There are great needs there in order to deliver economic relief to the population, which was a mandate, of course, of President Rouhani as part of this deal and following on.
All right, thank you. And with that, I'll yield back.